Contemporaries of Verdi and Wagner, Part 1. In Russia. In the second half of the 19th century, one man dominated the Italian opera scene, Giuseppe Verdi. In Germany at this time the Roost was ruled, absolutely, by Richard Wagner, a stifling presence and one of the most influential musicians. Not one composer dominated the Russian opera scene. In Russia a serious approach to indigenous culture was manifested in a development heralded by Mikhail Glinka, the first to forge a Russian voice that was not mimicry of European models. Glinka's operas, with their speech-based vocal melodies, innovative instrumentation and epic scenarios, were a source of inspiration for Russian musicians. Ruslan and Ludmila and A Life for the Tsar were played throughout Europe. I have not allocated any more of this talk to Glinka. The excerpt from the Life for the Tsar is Sobin and Zaria Brothers Into the Snowstorm sung by Vladimir Grishko. Excerpt 1. Within 7 years of Glinka's death the reforming Tsar Alexander II had established the St. Petersburg and Moscow conservatories, institutions that played a crucial role in fostering the intensely patriotic group of musicians known as the Five or the Mighty Handful: Mily Balakirev, Cesare Gui, Alexander Borodin, Modest Mussorgsky and Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. In musical terms, Borodin's Prince Igor is the least Russian of the operas produced by this group, though its subject matter is rooted in his homeland. Chemistry Professor Borodin was a chemist by profession and a hobbyist composer. The next excerpt is from Prince Igor. In captivity Prince Vladimir, Igor's son, has fallen in love with his enemy's daughter, the Polotsk Khan's daughter, and expresses his feelings in this aria. This is sung by Vladimir Grishko. Excerpt 2. In Rimsky-Korsakov's fairy tale operas we encounter a panoply of Russian effects, principally non-Western harmony and orchestration and a lavish use of pictorial imagery. The Golden Cockerel. Not only are we not sure what it all means, but we are not quite sure that it means anything at all, or that it meant anything to Rimsky-Korsakov who composed the music, or to Belsky the librettist, or for that matter to Pushkin, who wrote the source poem. Is the opera anything other than opportunity after opportunity for humor, beauty, burlesque, and, occasionally sincere feeling? All the ingredients are so good in themselves, do we care that we don't know what to call this strange dish? But wait, we can call it a satire on military incompetence, aristocratic stupidity and political corruption. The Golden Cockerel was Rimsky-Korsakov's last of 15 operas, premiered in 1909. It was also his most provocative. In 1904 the Japanese government, despairing of ever being able to persuade the Russians to give them back Manchuria, launched a naval attack on Port Arthur. The Russians lost the opening battle, and most of the ensuing conflicts. The Russian army and navy were humiliated, by a country thought incapable of organizing any serious military threat. Shortly after the Japanese victory in 1906, Rimsky began The Golden Cockerel, using a libretto that turned Pushkin's original tale into a satire of military incompetence, aristocratic stupidity, and political corruption. When Rimsky was forced to submit it to the censors, it was barred from production. He died in 1908 aged 64, without ever having heard the opera performed. The next excerpt is from The Golden Cockerel. Didon himself leads an army to the farthest borders of the kingdom. Arriving there, he is horrified at what he discovers. All along the border of his land, are strewn out the dead bodies of his soldiers, that he had sent into battle. He also finds the slaughtered bodies of his 2 sons, their armies have apparently fought each other to total destruction. Dum's Didon is then overcome with sickness and grief. The excerpt comes in here. He walks into a tent to sit down, and there his sadness is lifted, when he sees a most beautiful sight. Before him stands the seductive gorgeous Queen of Shemukha. The young woman, with nothing but a short clarinet phrase as a prelude, which she seems to interrupt prematurely, sings her famous hymn to the sun, sensuously beautiful melody. This is sung by Anastasia Prokofieva. Excerpt 3. Next, here is the Song of India from Sadko by Rimsky-Korsakov. Excerpt 4. At the oppo-negation site extreme to the sprightliness of Rimsky-Korsakov stands Mussorgsky, whose single-completed opera Boris Godunov is considered by many to be the greatest of all Russian operas. Boris Godunov overwhelms you with its Russianness. There is practically nothing so Russian in art, save Eisenstein's great film Ivan the Terrible. By comparison, Dostoevsky seems like a New York crime writer, Chekhov, a Western European country gent. Boris's gloom is Russian gloom. A lot of the music seems to come straight from the Russian steppes. The continuing thread is of course Boris's guilt. A bit of historical background. Tsar Fyodor's heir was Dmitri. The opera hinges on the belief that Boris, in order to become Tsar, had Dmitri done away with as a baby. The great moments in Boris are of two kinds, the crowd kind and the Boris kind. It is one of the great monuments of 19th century Russian art, and is different, quite different, from any other opera. And all this was composed by a man who never gave up his day job, first in the army, and then in the civil service, except for a 5-year break devoted to songwriting. And all this was composed with almost no music training. The next excerpt, The Courtyard of a Monastery. We are in Moscow in the year 1598 and it is very cold as the crowd control police beat up the citizens and force them to get on their knees. They are required to pray that Boris Godunov will decide to become Tsar. At this moment he is within the monastery allegedly torn with doubts, but we all know the old trick of the hard-to-get presidential candidate who won't stand unless he is drafted. The cabinet secretary comes out and says, "No decision today, lads, come round to the Kremlin tomorrow at 11 a.m. Some blind pilgrims come on singing, and a holy message is usually a good tip in opera, but this time no one can make out what the hell they are on about." Excerpt 5. In order to become Tsar, Boris had Dmitri done away with as a baby. After his coronation, a monk hears a story or rumor from a fellow monk, Pimen, about the killing. He asks himself, what if Dmitri had survived? He has the brilliant idea of pretending he is the long-lost Dmitri, leaves the monastery, forms an army with the help of the Polish government, and marches on Russia as Dmitri, the pretender to the Russian throne. Before the next excerpt, the self-styled Dmitri and Marina, a Polish princess, go on like this. "When are you going to be Tsar?" she asks. "Oh dear, so you don't love me for myself," says Dmitri, always ready as are most opera Russians, to look on the gloomy side of things. He launches into some high passion. "You creep," she says. "Hey, hold on." He cries, "I am a mighty military man, wait till I'm Tsar. Then see what I do to you." Now for the excerpt, the duet with Dmitri and Marina. This is the sweetened version by Rimsky-Korsakov. What to listen out for in this excerpt? Apparent change of heart, but don't trust her, Dmitri. "Oh but truly, I love you Dmitri," Marina sings in the most lovely lyrical passage in the opera. "I love you, I do." And a big warm tune creeps in under her singing line. He takes up the tune. At last they both appear to love each other, she really is using him. Climax. The long tune takes over in a very short symphony. She kneels, harp glissando. "Hail Tsar," says she. "Rise Tsarina," says he. They kiss. It's ecstasy. And now the formerly missing guests get into the act, to shout hurrah, but how can they have known what was afoot, unless they have been peeping through the bushes? This excerpt of the love duet was added later by Mussorgsky, and sweetened up by Rimsky-Korsakov, in his 1908 version. Here is the sweetened version. You can compare the Mussorgsky original style of the other excerpts, with this in the Rimsky style. This is sung in Russian. Dmitri is sung by Ludovico Spies, Marina by Galina Vishnevsky and conducted by Herbert von Karajan. Excerpt 6. Boris Godunov's rivals to this title of the greatest of all Russian operas are Eugene Onegin and the Queen of Spades, the masterworks of Pyotr Tchaikovsky. The most famous of all Russian composers was also the most complex. Eugene Onegin. Fate sometimes rejects what we ask for, quietly and adamantly, and for some people there is neither love nor happiness possible for them. That is the theme of Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin. Tatiana, and everyone else of the main characters, lose in a battle with destiny, that is, including Onegin. Tatiana is a simple young country girl, over-romantic and unsophisticated, longing for a happy future with Mr. Glam. In Act 3, we find her trapped in a marriage, spending her life without romance, as the very sophisticated wife of the elderly and stately Prince Gremin, frequenting the highest circles, immensely rich, and of the nobility. Very unhappy, living what she feels to be an empty life, despite her loving, loyal, respected and immensely rich husband who adores her. Eugene Onegin is one of the most lovable of operas, with an elegant and delicious score. What we love about Tchaikovsky's music is its intense emotionality. Lenski and Onegin have quarreled over Onegin's pretense pursuit of Lenski's girl, Olga, and Lenski has childishly challenged Onegin to a duel. Lenski regrets it now, and Onegin never wanted to fight at all. Both are trapped, and as a result, Onegin kills the only friend he had, and loved. The next excerpt. Lenski's Farewell. The theme of this melancholy and affecting aria occurs earlier in the opera, but now it is fully developed, and flowers into a wonderful set piece. Before the duel, Lenski has a chance to ponder his life, his love and his possible fate. This is sung by Stuart Burrows. Excerpt 7. The Queen of Spades. The opera was premiered in 1890. The entire opera was composed in Florence in 44 days of frenzied inspiration. The inordinate speed of composition was matched by an unusually tight construction and a quality of imagination unmatched in its way in the whole of Russian opera. The composer's many letters to his brother abound with expressions of happy amazement at his own powers of disciplined invention. Either I am horribly mistaken, Mogia, or the opera is a masterpiece, was the final verdict, one which the international operatic audience has ratified. Earlier he had written, I am so far firmly convinced that The Queen of Spades is a good, and mainly, a very original piece, speaking not from the musical point of view but in general. It has been said by critics that this, Tchaikovsky's penultimate opera, is the first and possibly the greatest masterpiece of musical surrealism. The anti-hero, Hermann, inspired Tchaikovsky to write his most forceful and dramatic operatic music. Initially a dignified, if rather excitable, member of the officer class, Hermann begins the opera singing the sort of sweet, sophisticated music you'd expect of a romantic tenor lead, but by the time he comes to play his final hand, he is a psychotic paranoiac, and his music has become shockingly high and declamatory, full of wild intervals that are both grotesque and thrilling. This opera provides evidence of the composer's increasing occupation with emotions bordering on hysteria. Hermann loves Lisa, who is engaged to a nobleman. Hermann overhears a story about Lisa's grandmother, who was a beauty when she was young, and one of her most ardent admirers was the Count Saint-Germain, but alas, she preferred gambling to love. One day at the tables she had lost everything. Her depression was noticed by the Count, who followed her from the room, and offered to reveal to her the secret of 3 cards, would she but grant him one rendezvous. Her indignation at such a suggestion was quickly overcome, and next morning she was back at the tables, where nothing could stop her winning run. It was whispered that she subsequently passed the secret on to her husband, and years later to a young gallant who had taken her fancy, but in a dream she had been warned that she would die when next anyone tried to win her secret from her. Herman is obsessed with obtaining that secret, and this results in his frightening the grandmother to death and to the separate suicides of Lisa and Herman. The next excerpt. Lisa's room. A balcony can be seen through the open window, and beyond it the garden. Suddenly Herman appears at the window. Lisa makes as if to rush through the door, but Herman persuades her to stay and listen to him for a moment. In music of passionate tenderness, he declares his love, and it is immediately evident that Lisa is far from indifferent to what he says. Their conversation is interrupted by a loud knocking at the door. It is the Countess, come to see if Lisa is yet asleep. Excerpt 8.